I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. It looks like we are live. We're live on LinkedIn. So for those of you who actually follow Austin and I, you've been notified you're here. So with that, we're live. Austin from 2nd Chair, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here. Good morning.
All right. So just in way of background, I heard Austin on a podcast, The Unbillable Hour on the Legal Talk Network. And Austin, it would actually probably make a great companion episode to this one, because Austin talked about his background, talked about the origin of 2nd Chair, the things that it does. And then like a very small part of that conversation that you had on there, Austin, was about the billable hour and the impact that AI is having on it, and whether we like it or not. Yes, we could eliminate a lot of non-billable hours, which is what the unbillable hour is all about. But you're also going to eliminate billable hours, and you guys kind of touched on that. And so if you can, just give my audience, who they haven't come across you yet or they haven't listened to that episode yet, give them a little bit of a background on you and your company, but then we'll dive in on that topic.
Sure. So my name's Austin. I've got a JD out of the University of Mississippi, where I studied air and space law. My primary focus was on the space side of space law. I worked for a transnational company for a summer doing domestic and international space law licensing, journal, sort of the whole shebang, moot court, awards, blah, blah, blah. I thought I was done with entrepreneurship. I had been in sort of corporate technology before that, and I had an AI startup from 2017 to 2019. But when I was in law school, I had been writing about ChatGPT 2, actually. So that was before the big sort of winter where ChatGPT was rolled out publicly. And then, it got rolled out publicly. And I was like, the way that I'm being taught in law school to perform tasks, the way I'm seeing it as a summer intern, as an extern, these aren't the way that it has to be, maybe the way it should be, and certainly not the way I intend to do it in the future. So I hit up my friend, we co-founded our company, we started building. So I did that while as a student in law school, and then I've also been doing it ever since.
Well, tons of questions, just follow-up questions just to that. But before we even dive into that, I have to know, Austin, have you ever had to bill hours?
Yeah. So my first internship was a summer associate at a boutique IP firm. I was digital, and 6-minute intervals like everybody else.
Yeah. Now, had you ever had to do that before you were working at a law firm, or is this a first-time experience?
No, that was my first time. Yeah.
So what was that like then compared to entrepreneurship and working at other companies?
It's awful. I had worked at Amazon's headquarters here in Seattle, and while there in the structure of my work, I was tracking my hours, but generally it was in 1 hour increments, except for once a quarter where I was really doing minute to minute what I was doing. And that was one day. Once a quarter, and that was awful enough. And then doing it every day, I was like, humans aren't supposed to work like this. It's not. It is sort of antithetical to something like flow, like getting deep into work. Or if you do get into flow, then you have to sort of rewind and kind of try to reconstruct. It's just it's an overlay of layer on top of your primary layer that is necessary for purposes of billing, but it's not necessary for purposes of work product.
Yeah. And we're going to come back to flow in a second here. But I want to first ask, why at Amazon did you focus on keeping track of time at all? What was the purpose behind that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just in a very unusual position by the nature of what I was doing. I was sort of tasked to solve this problem that Amazon had that they wouldn't really want me talking about on camera.
Sure.
What I can say was a bunch of data got really messed up, important data, financial data, and I needed to find out why that happened and fix it. And so there wasn't a lot of accountability for my work, right? I was really sort of playing an investigator in a corporate environment. And so I think that someone who was not diligent could have just messed around, goofed off, and no one would have known better. So I think that was part of why I was audited, was just sort of regular accountability for what I was doing. And I also had two bosses. And so another sort of person could play one boss against the other and say, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time for that because I'm doing what boss A needs, but really not be doing that. And so I think this was a way for my two bosses and I to all be on the same page about how I'm spending my time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so when you originally scheduled this, you put in the comments of the talk the billable hour theory of labor, which I thought was a really
Oh, yeah.
interesting way to phrase that too, because I haven't talked about it much on this podcast, but I talk about it with others, is even just paying anybody by the hour. Even like
Yeah.
like because I formerly was and this I think I can't remember if this is still my LinkedIn or not, but I was a shift supervisor at Starbucks, and so I was
Okay.
paid by the hour, like to work at
Yeah.
Starbucks, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like this is nonsensical. But to me, it's just about being a bad manager. Of like you don't actually have goals for people, or you don't actually have like
Yeah.
certain like tasks, and you're not checking in with them. But like so, when I hear
Yes.
you just kept track of things that you did like every hour, that's more of like to tell your boss, well, this is what I worked on today. It's not necessarily
Right.
like how long did it take you, kind of thing. Is that right?
Right. Right. That's right. And primary function was what was I working on, with the
Hmm.
secondary function being how long did it take?
Hmm.
But I think that's reversed for lawyers, where the primary function is how long did it take you to do this thing? And that's we'll get into it.
Yeah, and because I'm curious to know too, like even the days once out of a year where you would see like what are you doing every minute, is that was that an efficiency thing to be like, okay, like maybe this took a long time to do this. How do I make it not take as long next time? Was that part of it?
Not really. The kind of task I was working on was really sort of fixing and cleaning up something that had gone wrong and making sure it never goes wrong in the future. So in
Okay,
that way, there was no sort of like, if I were to return this task in the future, I think
right.
it was much more for sort of, accountability between my two bosses.
Got it. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So going back to flow,
Sure.
long-time listeners of the podcast will know because now we're in like the 100 and I forget because I'm recorded so far in advance. I think we're in the 130s maybe that's published live, even though I'm in like the 160s. Um, Back episode 11, I think it was. I interviewed a personal like coach for professionals, and his whole thing was called conscious flow control, where like he'd
Oh,
help people get into flow and get out of flow because there's like a little bit of a hangover when you get out of flow if you don't do it in a conscious way. So it was called conscious flow control, and you're that's so right. Like it brings me back to that, right? Of like you're not incentivized to get into flow and like okay, that was
uh,
6 minutes or that was point two or point three. Now I have to shift gears entirely into something else, right?
yeah. I was a psych major in undergrad. Well, I major double minor, so it's in a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of different fields. But yeah, I think flow. I've seen sort of folks talking about the profession of lawyers and why we're so unhappy as professionals. And one reason might be that we actually struggle to get into flow as a feature of the kind of work that we do. And even if you say something like, I'm going to book 3 hours to do deep work, that again came out of Amazon. Amazon had a theory of deep work. They didn't call it flow. It's functionally the same. But they wanted sort of uninterrupted time for folks to just do stuff without having to answer emails or blah, blah, blah. But the nature of the work that many lawyers do involves being on call. So you're doing something and your client calls you up with a fire, or your firm partner calls you up and something's changed. And so the dynamicism that comes with being lawyers in those environments means that even if you're trying to cultivate flow or just time where you can focus on work, the nature of our work really resists that sometimes.
Yeah, and with your background, I wonder if the reason why lawyers are also so unhappy is we have to work in silos because a client doesn't want to pay for double billable hours by two lawyers or more working together. Teamwork.
Yeah.
Ugh, forbid. Like don't do any teamwork. It doubles our bill.
Right, right. Which sort of returns to like the structure of labor, or a theory of labor is
Hmm.
one that compels lawyers to work in ways that I don't think are great for lawyers. And I also kind of don't think that they're great for like the end experience that clients get. And so that's like why, that's part of why I wanted to build a technology company, was because I just don't think that like the legacy way of working, which is also historical outcome, has produced over time. It didn't just magically appear. I think the historical factors that produce the way that lawyers work now aren't going, those factors are changing. And so the way lawyers work in the future aren't going to look the same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, agree. And so, like, was that was essentially the impetus behind Second Chair, or like, what was the impetus behind it, and what exactly does it do?
Okay. Well, the very first thing that got Second Chair going was like ChatGPT was cool. ChatGPT is not useful to lawyers if all it does is spit out stuff because you don't know if it's truthful or not. So I think lawyers really wanted AI with citations. Like you wanted to know what the model was pulling from so that you could verify, is it truthful? Or even if it's truthful, do you sort of agree with the conclusion, which is not the same thing as truth? And so all of that involves being able to investigate, where does the AI pull its information from? the other sort of, and that's what we started building. I think the other thing that makes something like ChatGPT not super useful is that it's only on publicly available data. You generally the web, not just the web, but that's a lot of it. And so we're like, it'd be really cool if something like ChatGPT could have access to like your stuff, your firm's templates, your email, your law review articles that you pulled and rely on every once in a while, whatever it is. And so that was the other thing we started to build. The underlying technology that produces that is all the same. So we were like, really, lawyers need AI with citations for us to get time savings out of the use of this technology and be able to put our name on it and not be scared that it's wrong when we file something with AI to the court. So that's really where we started. Our tool we call it a legal assistant. It works across 3 domains. It helps with sort of doc review, it helps with legal research, and it helps with legal writing.
So at the time that you were building this, which was like 2 years ago, you said, right? Something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's when like all these legal AI companies were coming out of the woodworks, right? And so, like you said, the 3 main things that your company does. I could think
Yeah.
of a lot of competitors, right? Some of them even
Yeah.
sponsor this podcast, right? But I'm in true
Yes.
journalistic nature. Like I gotta talk
Yes.
about the new interesting products, especially when they could talk about how it helps end the billable hour. So, like, how
Sure.
do you distinguish yourself amongst this really competitive field?
Well, when we started, there were 7 of us. And now I think I saw the Legal Tech Hub release their landscape map. I think there's 78 in our product category.
Yeah, only
A bunch of
78.
yeah, only right. Some of them, multi-million dollars in funding, like over $10 million in funding. Some of them like, some couple folks in a dream on an Instagram page with like 4 followers, like I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, how do we differentiate ourselves? So I think a bunch of what differentiates us is actually not customer facing. So we had to home grow a bunch of solutions to solve really hard problems that are engineering nerdy stuff and probably not for our lawyers. But a quick example is like for an AI to consume information, it has to parse a document. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. We decided to build our own parser because the ones that you could get from somebody like Google don't perform well on long documents, and they don't perform well on legal documents. A classic example is like if you say, hey, every time there's a period, call that a sentence. Well, as you and I know from the way that lawyers do citations, you're going to have a lot of periods that the AI is going to struggle to parse. So or how do you take footnotes and make sense of those in a document, or endnotes, right? So that the AI doesn't just not focus on that material or sort of conceptually have a blind spot to it. So those are all things that we needed to solve. The short answer is like that makes our product substantially better in terms of output, but it's not something that's easy to explain to the average consumer.
And even the citation part of it, like that's something that lawyers were probably billing for, bundled in with legal research and drafting anyway, but maybe isn't
That's right.
like traditionally something a billable hour client would want to pay for, right?
That's right.
So, you are kind of you're eliminating billable time that was probably being billed, but maybe shouldn't have been billed with that kind of a tool.
Yeah, so sometimes for some firms, they only use us for non-billable work to speed up non-billables. Others use us to speed up billables, but that they are writing down because their client would really, they reject the bill if they saw like the true cost of the time on it. So those markdown hours or write down hours. Some folks only have their associates or their paralegals use it. These folks or folks who are otherwise in training who again are kind of taking too long. But yeah, and that sort of speaks to sort of this problem where some firms are incentivized to not go faster, to not provide, to not be more efficient because they don't have a financial incentive to. I keep a list now of the number of times the lawyer has said to me, I don't want your product because I don't want to go faster. And I think that that's weird and gross, and I don't like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what this podcast is trying to change, right? It's trying to show lawyers like there are other viable, frankly, all better business models. Like who wants to artificially cap how much money you could earn in a day? And the only way to earn more money is have a really
Yeah.
high expense of a salary of somebody who's a biller, right? Like
Yeah.
the net like gain of that. Like you're
Yeah.
like inching forward in terms of growing your
Yes.
revenue. It's
So
absurd.
and I think that's the way probably that business people should think about it, firm owners, folks listening to this. Because like I get to own a technology company, I actually think about it a little differently, which is a theory of justice, which is like data suggests, large access to justice problem in the United States of people with a cognizable legal harm, less than 10% of them will touch a lawyer. So the demand for legal labor is like 10 to 1 over like what our legal supply is. And so I'm like, there's so many people who want access to lawyers who would benefit, who more justice or value could be produced for society. Why engage in a model of business that is disincentivized from doing that? It's like literally trying to go the other way, which is like kind of constrain our time as much as possible. And so I think that the net effect of that at a societal level is like less people get lawyers when they could use them or need them.
Yeah, this will have to be a question that I ask Notebook LM about all my records of podcasts episodes, which is the first time I heard this phrase, which I could do that without having to go back and read a bunch of transcripts or listen to a bunch of episodes. But it is somebody
Yeah.
introduced me to the term of the latent legal market.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
And so like that's what you're talking about. So it's not just access to justice. And you talked a little bit about this too, which is why I really wanted to have you on. Is it's not just about access to justice, although it is closing that access gap. But lawyers can make more money by serving that
Yes.
gap. They just have to charge
100%.
in a
100%.
different way, right? So it's what I found is it's at least a $1.3 trillion market opportunity, right? Because $400 billion was spent on legal services in 2024 in the US.
Yeah.
We know only 10 to 20% of that, of like actual legal needs that are known legal needs are being met. So that means
Yes.
if you do a little bit of inverse math there, you get to about $1.3 trillion. So huge market opportunity. And that's assuming like billable hours, because that's the most of the market, and that they know that they have a legal problem. So,
Yes.
really, it's like, I think it's easily over $2 trillion market opportunity when you're billing alternatively, you're doing automations, you're efficient, and you could serve even more people before they know they have a legal problem or before they have a legal problem.
Yeah, so we've been approached by folks who are like, can you kind of like productize a thing? Like here's a terms and service review for a website, right? So many companies just grab one off the web, they fill it in themselves. Maybe they use AI. They say, I hope this is good enough. They never talk to a lawyer about it. Is it compliant with the law? Who knows? They don't know, Good luck. And so people have approached us being like, hey, if you could just say like, can you kind of make a software, do something where it's like that I could just say for $200 and 3 to 5 minutes of my time, the AI does the first pass, identifies some stuff, I look at it, and then, I sign off on it. And then, you're making fast money by just like blowing through this, called it a Fordist factory style production of a particular kind of work. I think the flip side of that, so that's sort of like lawyers productizing what they do to deliver it quite quickly, and then working at volume is sort of niching into a particular kind of work. I think the flip side of that is something like Washington State is in its pilot program. Do you know about this?
A little bit, yeah. But go ahead,
So
explain it.
yeah, they're a portion of their bar sort of put out a call to industry and has elected to engage in a pilot program to allow for technology companies to provide direct-to-consumer legal services under limited licenses, or this pilot program with the Washington State Bar. So sort of like the sandbox in Utah or Arizona, it's a way to test like, do we actually need lawyers to be the ones delivering these services, or can we have technology or paralegals enabled with technology, or AI that has for intents and purposes, been capable of passing the bar to provide a limited set of legal services direct to consumers to treat that latent market.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out. The question is, are they going to be like tracking hours and seeing how many hours it takes and all this stuff, right? Because like that's going to be a major hindrance. So they're like, oh, it's not profitable for me. Well, like what does that even mean, right? Because if you're not billing by the hour, the less time something takes you, the more profitable you are. That's literally the inverse mindset of like a billable hour lawyer, and it's hard to get them in that mindset.
Yes.
I have a question for you about the name of the company, 2nd Chair.
Sure.
Do you primarily have a focus on litigation? like why you named it second chair? Like, because there are some limiting things, which could be good. It's good to
Yes.
live within some
Yes.
constraints, but was that the intent, and is
Yes.
that ultimately where you landed too?
Yeah, yeah. So the intention of the name was we just sort of wanted like we were pioneering that legal AI assistant category. So we were like we wanted sort of every lawyer to have a second chair behind them. And that was sort of the AI, right?
Hmm.
Um, but to your point, it presumes sort of a litigation framework. So some folks have been like, "Oh, I do transaction, like your product's not for me." We our tool does serve a collection, like really sort of it's agnostic as to the kinds of lawyers who can use it. Though we find that litigators end up just doing more work that is aligned with what our tool's capabilities are.
Right.
So, we've got some workflows that are really well suited for litigators. Like you can dump in a bunch of documents. It just makes you a timeline, right? Like that's helpful if you're taking on a new client, if you're an appellate attorney trying to understand an underlying record, if you're, trying to make sense of this new client that's just dumped in a bunch of like discovery information,
Well,
whatever it
well,
is.
well let me jump in there because if you're corporate
Okay.
counsel and you're just
Yeah.
coming in as new corporate counsel or fractional general counsel like I am, where like you're coming
Yes.
into a new client or your client if you're in house and you have to like make sense of all this historical contractual data, a
Oh
timeline
my
would be
gosh.
really nice, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, right? Even a contractual person might have use for that feature.
Hmm.
But we see it sort of a little more popular on the litigator side. We have access to over 10 million pieces of case law, sort of at the and all code and like code constitutions. So sometimes contractual folks find that useful. Other times it's more litigator side. Like I said, I I really just want to make AI tools that have the same capabilities of what like big law lawyers are getting, but brought down to everyday folks who can't pay big law legal tool prices.
Yeah, and
And
that's
so,
another reason I wanted to talk to you, Austin, is because
sure.
you advertise you're for solo and small firms, which like
Yes,
legal tech
100%.
companies, they don't price themselves for that. They
No,
don't
no.
like they try to sell into them, but like they want to lock people into long-term contracts and like and then so they very quickly I've seen companies pivot from we're selling to solo small firms to we're selling to in-house lawyers because our tech saves them time
Yes,
and we didn't
yes,
price it right, like
yes.
yeah.
And it's that second one. It's really about pricing it right, right? And so for us, we do a bunch of stuff like we let you do month to month. Like we'll offer you a better rate if you want to give us a year, but like we'll let you do month to month because I understand that like, you take on a big case, you need some help as like a solo or a two-person or three-person firm. That case eventually goes away, or you get through sort of this intense work period. You don't need it. Like, and then also pricing, right? Like for us, it's $150 a month, like per seat at your law firm. So I've had small town attorneys scoff at me and say that they spend more on like Diet Coke for their firm than that per month. And I think that that's right for me because it's like our intention is really to just like, again, drive more justice in the world because there's so many lawyers who would benefit from this kind of tech. But to your point, Matt, I think that the business decision is correct for most of these, sort of large venture-backed companies to say small and solos, they're a hard market to sell to. They're heterogeneous. It's hard to get in front of a lot of them at once. They all want something else. Where can I go? I can go to in-house where I can get them on a year and I can sort of show good MMR, ARR numbers for my investors. And I can have sort of beachhead clients who will pay my bills and keep my lights on. It's an easier way to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, yeah. But nevertheless, you still did pick the subscription model for your business. So why did you do that instead of like let's say a usage-based model?
Yeah, I think I don't know what the long-term strategy is. We found sort of this subscription-based model makes sense. Again, like in the same way that folks don't love like on a billable to be ask a lawyer to go do a task and then get like an indeterminate bill back, or sort of like they're expecting in their head they have a theory of how wide of a range it's going to be, and then they get the bill and hopefully it's somewhere in the middle. Usage kind of feels the same way to me, where like you might not have an intuitive sense about like the cost of a search or the cost of a query. And so, and those are things that we know on a business side, but users don't. We're still early and people are starting to use AI. Our tool can take on like 10,000 documents at once. And so if you're going to use it for those functions, it's going to, I don't know. It's just like, let's just keep this simple for like y'all's business, for my business, just like pay me a fixed amount. Unless you're like using it in a really remarkable way, like you're probably not going to like nuke we're not going to have super new users who like kind of like nuke our business. And if they do, like we'll send them an email and we'll figure it out, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I'm looking at your pricing page right now, and it's interesting
sure,
because I'm subscription minded, and I know all about the
sure,
subscription economy, and so I see
sure.
you've got the three-tiered structure, but it's not. But you do have three prices, right? So you've got the free trial, you got the professional, and the student, right? And so right now, if I'm a lawyer, I just have one price. I could get a deal on that price if I pay annually versus monthly, but it's still super
That's right.
reasonable even for monthly. So have you
That's right.
thought of having like a two price tier where like you get everything that you're going to need as a lawyer, but like if you want analytics, if you want this, if you want like that, you want to run 10,000 documents, like that's like behind like a pro level user.
Yes, and like we've thought about it, we talked about it. We might pivot to that bridge. We'll see. You know, like as a startup person, as a business owner, I think there's something to be said about being dynamic in the business environment. I if you'll let me, I actually want to go back to an earlier question you had
Yeah,
asked,
yeah.
which is like, why not bill by the usage or the hour? So we were in this business cohort. There's pretty much another group that did a different business. They did something similar to us, but for accountants. And they were like, you know, we can sort of use AI to automate all these things an accountant would do and then sell those to businesses. And the way that they built was, well, they called it their AI wage. And it was functionally an hourly cost for the folks to use their AI. That was, you know, about half the cost of what it would take to have like a real human accountant do it, and none of the taxes, which
Hmm.
was, you know, heated to their marketing. Like you don't have to pay the 401k matching and the state health insurance plan and the this and the that, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which of
yeah.
course are the costs exceed just the hourly wage of that person. And so I think that theory lets businesses attempt to extract more value out of folks, but I think that like small and solos are still so early in adopting legal AI tools that I think it's more about getting folks started and using it than it is sort of trying to extract maximalist value out of the business relationship. Um,
Certainly
Call
for
me a bad businessman.
no,
I
no,
don't know.
I'm the same way with my business, right? Like, sure, could I
Yeah,
charge more for the services that I'm delivering, that I'm delivering on a monthly basis? Absolutely, but I care more about lifetime value and that those clients are happy and stay subscribed, right? And
yeah,
so,
yeah,
yeah, sure. Like, are you giving up lifetime value in the long term? Are you sacrificing that to maximize short term, monthly recurring revenue? Right? Like, and
yeah,
that's like, what you have to be asking yourself, and or just monthly revenue or annual revenue in general, if you're doing a metered based
yeah.
approach, and you give that up, right? You give up that lifetime value possibly because you bet the sooner that a more transparent pricing thing comes around that does what you do better, they're gone. You're losing that customer. Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed. Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show.
Let me, yeah, and I want to speak to that. So I've talked to folks for who they're like, hey, why would I use you when I could use Lexis AI, Lexis Protege, CoCounsel, the Thomson Reuters AI suite, the Lexis AI suite? And I have had the reverse where people come to us from the duopoly and
Yeah.
they say, oh my God, I love your tool because I'm not clicking on a button being told you're not paying for some premium feature set or some collection of things and can't use that until you pay this amount extra and that amount extra. And it's like the entire tool is paywall to upsell you. And they're over that. They're over that with Thompson and Lexis in general as technology and research tool providers. They're over that from their subscriptions, not in the legal sense, just like they're kind of over to they're tired of that theory of product or that user experience. And there's just so refreshed that it's like, here's your price, get in, get using it, and like we're here to help you, but not here to like nickel and dime you along the way.
Right, right. No, I think that's great positioning in this long entrenched like market of like
Mm.
the duopoly, like you said, because I remember experiencing that a lot as a practitioner at other firms.
Ah,
And
yeah,
and you know, so I get the one type of pricing because of that. I still almost think like even just like a two option, like a plussing option would still, because right
yeah,
now it's okay, I subscribe or I don't, or I free trial or I pay. And that's like that's not really like I think about this, right? Because I have options for my clients to subscribe at, and I always have a base level and a plus level, you know, for
mm,
all of my levels,
mm,
because I want to give them the choice between how much they actually want, right? And like I actually split it up in such a way that would make sense for somebody who's like a super user, right? Only needs these
yeah,
additional products. And you
yeah,
know, what's interesting is Calendly, I usually have my Calendly mug. I can't show my Calendly mug. I'm a Calendly connector. But Calendly did an interesting thing with their subscription pricing where they looked at who was using certain features and they actually made a lower, like what they used to call the professional subscription. Now they call it a standard subscription, and it's only $30
yeah,
a year less. But they were like, look,
yeah,
like most of our users at the pro level are not using these features that cost probably more
yes,
to. So like they gave a lower subscription, and like that's
yes,
like a
yes,
weird thing to have to do, right? Like to have to like lower a subscription on one end, and then I have some premium other subscriptions on the other, and like kudos to them. I think they actually did a really good job with it, but like that is like I think there's something to that, right? Like actually just giving like the base level users the base features that they're only going to use, and not because like you want to paywall them for the advanced features, but because they're just not going to use them.
yes. So I've actually been thinking about this. So I'll flip it to the audience, podcast listeners, LinkedIn Live folks. Get in while it's hot because we've got right now all of our legal research is, it's not paywall, so it's built in. So one way to think about what we do is that for the yearly, if you take the yearly price and divide it by 12 for your Lexus, we are slightly less than the cost of that per month to get all of your legal research and your AI tools instead of just your legal research. And we've thought about whether or not it makes sense to sort of independently price the legal research portion, the case law, statutory stuff, et cetera. So, listeners, I don't know, keep an eye out because Matthew's really trying to convince me that I should be charging you extra for that. So get in while you can.
Well, look, I do pride myself on my ability to understand subscription pricing and such, and so I like to talk about that here because I want the law firm owners to extrapolate into their practice
Yes.
this
Yes.
subscription business model conversation. Another thing is also they've been on the pod Spellbook. They were originally Rally Legal, and then they had a product called Spellbook, and they just totally rebranded their whole company as Spellbook. So I see you've got a
Mhm.
product called David
Mhm.
AI. Like
Yes.
that's not as limiting as litigation, Austin. You know, while you're here, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
David AI. You know,
We've also had folks come up to us and be like, no matter what happens with your company, if you go under, if you sell, if you whatever, just like camp that trademark, camp that like second chair is just a good name for a legal business, and someone will probably come along and want to pay you for that at some point in the future.
I mean, maybe like here's the thing, like like even like your Harveys, right? Like
Yeah.
Harvey and Paxton, right? Like those, like Harvey, I guess was that from that show. One of the guys was named Harvey. I don't know. I don't watch legal shows. I can't.
Suits.
Yeah, Suits.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then Paxton, which is the legal AI tool I'm using right now. You know, like those are just names, right?
Yeah.
Like they're
Oh
just
yeah.
names. Like they're not inherently anything legal. So there's something to that, right? Then there's something to the niche. Like this is obviously for legal. So
So
it's interesting.
I do want at the top of the hour, a couple more minutes, I want to bring us back to sort of like billable hour stuff. But I will say we have a whole piece on like why we named our AI David. And a little teaser, we're actually rolling out our second AI tool, which is really different. It's
Goliath?
it's still in
Is it called
sorry.
Goliath? Are you calling it Goliath? And then they could pick David
That
versus Goliath.
that was the joke. We thought about it. But I say that because it's part of why we have Second Chair, but also David. David is one tool that Second Chair makes. And our vision of the company involves quite a few different AI tools that are pretty different from each other. So for instance, when we decided we wanted to roll in like legal research functions into our existing David tool, conceptually it made sense because of what David did, how users were using it in their workflows. So, it didn't make sense to have a whole separate tool. But this new one that we're building is truly a different tool. The way it adds value to a law firm is quite different. And so it should be sort of, and the workflows it does sort of, et cetera. So long story short, hear you on David and second chair sort of being distinct. We did that on purpose because there's going to be a family of little AIs that eventually are going to come out. So
All right, all right. Teaser.
these are,
It's good to have some teasers.
and I'll say for you, this is actually the first time I've said that, camera or blog
Exclusive,
post or otherwise.
exclusive,
So
law subscribed exclusive, second chair
there you go.
exclusive with law subscribed. Thank you. Appreciate the exclusive. So something you said, and so to lead us in back to the billable hour and take this wherever you want.
Sure.
But you mentioned how some of these firms that are your clients, they are having their like paralegals or younger staff or younger attorneys use your product because they're pretty inefficient. But what are they expecting them to like ditch the product when they like when they learn how it's not so at a certain point like that's fine for you. Let them rationalize it however they want as long as the people are using the tool. But it's going to get rid of billable hours.
Yeah, or it's these folks are going to be sort of appropriately at the speed of the expectation of they're going to be at the appropriate expectation for the delivery of billable hours, but only if they're AI enabled. I think
Yep. But
that's
what if
maybe
they?
another way to think about it.
I guess. But what if they could get the product done, the work product done even faster? Isn't that more valuable to the client to have faster work product?
Listen, you're selling the wrong man.
Well, I'm thinking maybe you share this episode with your audience, with your clients, with your customers and future customers, right?
Yeah,
And the point is it can be more valuable both to the client and the law firm, but you have to do
that's right.
value-based pricing and you don't do
That's right.
shadow billing.
That's right. And here's the real thing that I think about. Like I spend a good amount of time chatting with like my legal profession professor at law school, both when I was a student, working on this company, and then he ended up authoring the opinion for the state about sort of generative AI, and and in the history of lawyers, right? We have the counselor duty or obligation under our law license. But I think the actual labor that lawyers perform has migrated far away from that. And in my history and telling of this, it happens around the sort of commercialization of the legal profession in the 70s. It's sort of exacerbated or dramatically increased in sort of the insurance like change in American civil society in the 80s. And so what happens is that sort of post that, you get lawyers for who the work that we do is primarily glorified work product creators and work product reviewers. So contract formation, document review, like it's just like all we do is like input output words. And historically lawyers didn't do that, right? We did more sort of I don't know, advisory counselor, almost therapist stuff. I'm sure your listeners still do some of that now. I mean, it's not to say that lawyers don't do it now, but it's to say that the sort of proportion of work that the majority of lawyers do has dramatically shifted. And I think it's shifted towards things that like AI tools can either do quite quickly or do entirely. And I think that we kind of saw this in with like LegalZoom and the propensity of LegalZoom as a business to just kind of like deliver to customers because a chunk of lawyers are just like taking templates, populating them in, and delivering them to their clients and calling that legal labor. And
You
it
could
is,
make it you could make the client fill out that information that automatically populates it.
yeah, or an AI or like your minimum wage college intern. Like I don't know. And so that's to say that I think that the general shift of labor performed by the profession has moved in a certain way, and AI will pull us back from that. Like whether we want to or not, I think it will turn us more into counselors whose job it is to be sort of like the most adult person in the room, to think about the highest and best interests of our values, to do more advocacy, not necessarily sort of like court-based legal persuasion, but just like general advocacy, negotiation and deal making, like those sorts of things. Um, but I also think that a bunch of lawyers are poorly suited at the level of temperament to do that kind of work.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's a collection of transactional folks who love that they like get to sit in their office and like review contracts and not talk to people for very much during the day. And that's good for them.
Yeah, and something you said really resonated about like historically lawyers didn't do the types of work that we're doing now, but I think since 1970, where the billable hour came into play, every financial incentive in the world came for lawyers to do more drudge work because you could make more money doing more drudge work.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yes.
that's the financial incentive. That's where that came in. And
Yes.
I'd be curious to know what it looked like, if it looked more like counseling, like you said, prior to 1970.
Yeah. And that's where like, you'll need a new guest, a
Maybe,
legal
maybe.
historian. But I know some folks if you want to have them on.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good perspective. So, because at the end of the day, I see like it's not just 10 hours becoming 1 hour. It's 10 hours becoming 10 minutes. That the AI did the 10-hour work in the first minute, and the lawyer spends the next 9 minutes making it better than it ever would have been in 10 minutes by having a back and forth with the AI,
Mhm.
as a subject matter expert, you're going to have significantly better results. And it might take a layperson, 10 hours to get to that same output with an AI. And they might get there, but like then it's almost like the value of GPT wrappers, right? It's like, yes, I could prompt everything in ChatGPT to maybe get the same results, right? Now, of course, it sounds like you've built some tech on top of it that like it like goes through, filters something, but like maybe yes, I don't need to subscribe to legal AI because I could just use ChatGPT, and there are a lot of reasons you shouldn't do that. Um,
Yes.
but but even if you
But
have the privacy and all that stuff taken care of, like yeah, but how much prompting are you going to need to do to like get to the same output versus like typing something in and it already goes through all the background prompting and layers and the thing. So like that, it's the same thing, right? Like lawyers will still have value to provide even in an AI powered legal services world.
so we wrote this blog post that I think about a lot, where we're like, lawyers, it's time to talk to your clients about ChatGPT because like whether or not you're using ChatGPT, whether you're using any legal AI tool, your client probably is, right? Like, and it looks dramatically different. It might be that like ChatGPT is the first person they go to on a legal issue and they consult it, and then they come to you because they don't want your billable. And maybe that and there's two versions of that. One is that it makes them a more sophisticated legal consumer. They can better sort of articulate, whatever the thing is that they need because they've sort of had, call it coaching, right, from this AI tool. Or it could have dramatically misled them, and now like you're having to re-educate them because it's not super sophisticated on like case law in your jurisdiction or something.
Yeah.
Um, I've I've talked to a lot of startup entrepreneurs because I live in Seattle. There's a big startup scene here. And of course, when people find out I'm a lawyer, like I get all kinds of backdoor peeks and people tell me stuff they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I say that because, a good number of them will go and they'll first draft a contract with ChatGPT, or, pick your favorite AI tool. And then they'll bring that to their lawyer and say, lawyer, don't spend more than 15 minutes on this. Just review it. And the lawyers, I've heard from the lawyer side good versions of that where they're like, yep, I just like look it over, change a couple sentences, and I just made a couple bucks and I'm not mad. And I've heard the client perspective on that, which is like, I saved a ton of money. It, affixes, it gives me trust that if there's recourse, i.e., a law license for me to choke if something goes wrong on this contract. And, I just, that makes me nervous for lawyers. It really makes me nervous for lawyers because it's like, even the number one thing that AI is doing and will continue to do is change consumer expectation about legal services, both supply and demand, but also the perception or the expectation about that legal service demand.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something that I've done actually in that exact regard, because I've had clients come to
Yeah.
me that are like, I drafted this using AI and like I don't actually like even read it because I know it's not going to be sufficient. Like I take one look at it and be
But
like, oh, like this 4-page thing is to replace a 30-page operating agreement. That's just not going to cut it,
right,
you know?
right.
But it gives some insight into what they were thinking and what they
Yeah.
created with whatever AI tool that like consumer grade AI tool. So what I've done is I've literally taken that like into Paxton because it's like my main tool, and I'm sure people could use Second Chair for this. I'm curious to know if they could. And I've said I give it context. My client drafted this using ChatGPT. They're trying to do the X, Y, and Z thing. Like, within the context of that, like we need an actual operating agreement for an Illinois
Yes.
limited liability multi-member company, right? Like,
Yeah.
take this and use it as a starting point, for what they're trying to achieve in addition to complying with everything else. And maybe I might also upload another operating agreement. That's like, this is what a
Yeah.
real operating agreement looks like.
Yes.
So like take
Yes.
this and use this and like make that and like at least like, but for me to actually like read that, think about it, apply it, adapt it, like that would take days. Like, and now it's done in
Yeah.
like minutes.
And then two, it really speaks to the wide heterogeneity in areas of law. Because for something like business formation, absolutely, right? Like, but for some kinds of transactional law, civil like contracts between parties, et cetera, like I've seen them perform quite well, right? Or I think about what I did, like space law. Oh Lord. Oh Lord. Turns out international treaties, and the domestic obligations enacted through federal agencies are like really complicated, and AIs really don't know what they're doing. So,
And another thing too, and this is why I don't
yeah,
think AI is ever going to replace lawyers. I'm curious to
yeah,
get your
yeah, yeah.
perspective on this. Is like if I ask my graphic designer what technology they're using, they're going to be using Canva or Adobe or like whatever sort of Photoshop or whatever. And like, sure, I could go use those tools, but the more complicated and sophisticated they get, like it's
Yeah.
like you really don't know. But with language, the problem is there's this illusion of I understand it, right? And so like I like to say, like if you read a contract and you're a layperson,
Yes.
you see the
Yes.
math equivalent of like, 2 + 2 = 4 here, 2 × 2 = 4 there. Like you see like arithmetic and some basic algebra. But when a lawyer
Yes.
looks at a contract, we see, like very complicated like calculus and statistical equations. Like we just see it at a different level. We see it for what it really is.
Yes.
And but it's hard for people to maybe grasp that if they are using an AI tool to draft a contract or explain a contract.
Yes. And I think that this is a classic sort of derivative relationship to like a Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like
Yes.
um, where everyday people don't know what they don't know. And that's not to like, I don't know. I really think that like sort of lawyer prestige is also overhyped. That's for a different podcast. But it is to say that like we know at a textualist level, the decision to include and speak to something is an intent to like define or constrain a concept in the same way that an omission is a material decision you might make, right? A tactical decision to omit a particular kind of clause. And I think that that's actually one of the values that lawyers provide is not a reflection on what is present in a document or even a legal dispute or a negotiation, but it's sort of the experience to know what's absent. And that's, models, conceptually aren't good at that. It also takes a particular kind of like sort of philosophical prompting to be like, okay, AI, you've drafted me this contract. Now what's missing, right? Like how many people would do that step? And that's just, a human thing, right? We psychologically, when we're likely, there's a cognitive biases, blah, 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 whatever. Um, but I think to your point, the other value that lawyers will provide indefinitely as a profession is that we are a human for who there is recourse if things go wrong. Like if you're building a graphic and it comes out wrong because I don't know, like you're a graphic designer who's been replaced by like a kid with ChatGPT, or sorry, not ChatGPT, but like a Mid-Journey or whatever, and you're making like AI graphics law, like at the end of the day, like the material effect of that in a business sense is not so obviously a single person's fault. But in legal, the ramifications of our work can be quite high. And having a human to attribute those errors to hold liable is speaks to a very human concern, which is that when things go wrong, we want to blame someone and we want to either, inflict punishment or get justice and lawyers serve that function. It's why we have our law license, because we're the folks who are putting our necks on the line, being like, we've signed off on this, right? Like this is the decision we're going to make, and it's the right one, the good one. And so on AI can inform that decision-making process. I don't think it will ever change the human need to have, as my lawyer to my company says, a throat to choke when things go wrong.
Yeah. 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 I mean, we could keep going on, and maybe another day we will. But with that, Austin, if folks wanted to learn more about you, about Second Chair, get a demo, all that good stuff, how do they follow up, follow you, all that?
Yeah. So our website, 2ndchair.ai, so secondchair.ai. You can find us on LinkedIn, also Second Chair. You can find me, Austin Brittenham, Brittenham. My email, austin@secondchair.ai. We're super attentive to sort of all the ways that you might get in touch. There's also an open calendar link for anybody who'd want to reach out to me on my LinkedIn. We've got demo videos up on the website. You can get 2 weeks free if you just head over to our pricing page, check the tool, see if you like it. And, the last thing, we track the ongoing regulatory obligations that attorneys have from the state bar associations. So we keep this regulatory map. A bunch of big law firms like to come look at our page because I see their URLs. I won't name names, but I think we have one of the most comprehensive sort of lists of all of the bar associations and their guidance on AI, produced in a free to access map. So if you're in your state and you're like, hey, can I use AI for this? Or like, will I get in trouble if I do this? And you want to know what your bar association has said, we've got a map to help you at least, try to make sense of that. So I think those are all the ways to find me.
Great. Well, with that, stick around, Austin, because we have to vamp for a little bit to go off live to make sure everything is captured. But like Austin said, follow us on LinkedIn, click that bell to get all of our notifications. You could find out when I'm going live in the future. You could see what Austin's posting about. I know he's been doing the podcast, Legal Tech Podcast Circuit. So if you want to hear more from Austin, follow him on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll post about when he's doing those talks. And so with that, I just have one more thing. This is only for people who catch this live. And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.